Ever get that sneaky feeling like your brain kind of checks out when you swipe a credit card, versus like actually handing over cash?
Oh, totally. Like it just doesn't feel quite as real.
Exactly.
Right.
Today's deep dive is all about why that is. We're going deep, deep, deep into the psychology of credit cards.
Ooh, fascinating stuff.
It really is. And trust me, it gets kind of wild.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we're diving into excerpts from this really cool financial literacy channel. It's called Menos a más con M.
I've heard of them. They have really interesting stuff.
They do, they do. And they make this, well, I thought it was a really interesting comparison to casino chips.
Oh, interesting. I see where they're going with that.
Right.
Yeah, it's all about like creating that mental distance, right?
Yeah.
Between you and that feeling of actually spending. Think about it like when it's colorful chips or you're just tapping your phone.
It just hits different.
It does, compared to, seeing those hard-earned bills leaving your wallet.
Ugh, the worst.
Right.
So is that like the dissociation effect or something?
Yeah, the dissociation effect. It's like our brains haven't quite caught up to this whole digital age of spending.
It really is wild when you think about it. And then get this, they were talking about how like governments are actually encouraging this whole move away from physical cash.
Yeah, it's not just tech pushing us in this direction. There's a policy aspect too. Did you know that Spain's government actually wants to lower the limit on cash payments?
Really?
Yeah, from 2,500 euros down to just 1,000.
Wow. 1,000 euros. That seems, I don't know.
Kind of extreme.
A little bit, yeah. So like what happens if you actually prefer to use cash?
Yeah.
Or maybe you're not, totally comfortable with all this new technology.
Exactly.
It makes you think about like who gets left behind in this whole cashless society thing.
That's right. And those are some really important concerns to think about as we move toward a future where like digital transactions are just the norm.
Totally.
Because, while a cashless system could mean like more convenience and even security for some people, there are some valid concerns about like financial exclusion for those who maybe don't have easy access to digital banking.
Yeah.
Not to mention the potential for like increased government oversight on, our spending habits.
Right. It's like a double-edged sword in a way.
Exactly.
Now, before we go too far down that rabbit hole,
Yeah.
let's make sure we're all on the same page here about those two little plastic rectangles that we all have in our wallets.
Oh, yeah.
Debit cards and credit cards.
Important distinction.
Super important. Because I think a lot of people, they kind of use them interchangeably, or at least they don't really understand the difference.
Right. And it's a big difference.
Huge.
Because with a debit card, you're spending money that you actually have. It's sitting right there in your account, right?
It's like a digital check, basically.
Exactly. But a credit card, that's a whole other ballgame. That's basically a pre-approved loan.
Okay, so you're promising to pay back what you spend, but later.
Right. And hopefully before those interest rates really start to add up.
And that is where things can get a little dicey, let's be honest.
Oh, yeah.
I know I've been tempted by those spend now, pay later kind of schemes.
Totally.
But the Menos a más people, they really get into how credit card companies, they kind of exploit our psychology a little bit.
Yeah, they know what they're doing.
Oh, they do. To encourage us to spend more than we can actually afford.
Absolutely.
And they even call out, 3 major psychological villains of credit cards.
Okay. The villains, I like this.
Right.
Lay it on me.
So, villain number 1, present bias.
Oh, yeah. The I want it now monster.
Right. We've all been there.
We have.
And credit cards, they feed that impulse because they give us that instant gratification without having to feel the, immediate pain of paying for it.
Yeah, it's like our brains haven't quite grasped that we'll eventually have to, cough up the cash.
Exactly. It's so easy to forget about it. And then villain number 2 is this sneaky one. Mental accounting.
Oh, mental accounting. I'm guilty of this one.
Oh, me too. It's basically our brains playing tricks on us because we treat that credit limit like it's found money.
Right.
That we don't have to be as careful with as the money we earn from our paychecks.
Yeah, it's like when you find a $20 bill in your coat pocket. You're like, oh, bonus.
Yes.
But with credit, it's not bonus cash. It's borrowed money.
Exactly.
Right.
And those purchases, they add up.
Oh, they do.
Fast.
So fast.
Which, let's be honest, is exactly what those credit card companies want you to do.
Exactly. And it's often that subtle shift in mindset that gets people in trouble. Because the third villain the video talks about is that disconnect we feel from spending when we use plastic.
Ooh, tell me about it.
That pain of paying bias.
It's so easy to just rack up a big bill when you're not actually seeing the money changing hands.
Totally.
It's like my brain just doesn't register it
Right.
the same way as when I'm like handing over cash.
Yeah, like that moment at a restaurant when like everyone just throws their credit cards in the middle of the table.
Oh, yeah.
And we're like, wait a minute, how much am I actually spending here?
Yes. And then the bill comes and you're like, oh, no.
Exactly. And then it's too late.
Too late. Speaking of reality checks, the video paints a pretty stark picture of what they call the slippery slope of credit card debt.
Yeah.
It's like we get so caught up in these like psychological traps
Mhm.
that we don't realize we're like headed for trouble until it's,
Until it's too late.
too late.
And it often starts subtly, right? Just with a few small purchases here and there.
Right.
But then before you know it, you're relying on those credit cards just to cover like your basic expenses.
Oh, yeah.
You're essentially borrowing from your future self just to maintain your lifestyle right now.
Which, that can quickly snowball into a much bigger problem.
Oh, for sure.
The video calls out that minimum payment trap as like a major culprit here.
Ugh, the worst.
When you convince yourself that just paying, like the bare minimum is enough to stay afloat.
Right. It sounds manageable in theory.
Right, exactly.
But the thing is, those minimum payments are actually designed to keep you in debt longer.
Ugh, it's so frustrating.
Isn't it? Let's say you have like a $5,000 balance on a card with a high interest rate, like we're talking 18% or higher.
Oh, yeah.
Making those minimum payments, you could be stuck paying that off for years.
Wow, really?
And you end up shelling out way more in interest in the long run.
It's like it's almost like you're losing money.
Exactly. You're just throwing money away.
Okay, so we've talked about the psychological traps, the slippery slope of debt.
Right.
Now let's debunk some common myths about credit cards.
Okay. Let's do it.
The one that I think drives me crazy is I need a credit card for emergencies.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
I used to believe that.
It seems to make sense on the surface, right?
Right.
But you know what's actually essential for emergencies?
What?
A solid emergency fund. A separate savings account that's specifically designed to cover those unexpected costs, because relying on credit cards for those situations often just adds, like, financial stress on top of an already stressful situation.
Totally, totally. And speaking of myths, I've definitely fallen for the whole I need a credit card to rent a car thing.
Oh, the classic car rental myth.
Yes.
And while, some smaller rental companies might have stricter policies, the truth is that many car rental companies accept debit cards just fine.
They do. Okay.
Yeah, it just might require a higher deposit hold, so it's always good to double check.
That's good to know. Good to know.
Oh.
And like the same goes for booking hotels, right?
Absolutely. It's always smart to call ahead, just ask about their policies if you're planning to use a debit card, but it's definitely doable.
Okay, awesome. Here's another big one that I feel like a lot of people fall for. Credit card discounts and benefits totally outweigh the risks.
Oh, yeah. The allure of those flashy sign-up bonuses and the cashback reward.
Right. Come on, we've all been tempted by them.
Totally. But here's the thing. Are those rewards truly valuable if you're, like, constantly drowning in interest payments?
That's a good point.
You have to think about it like this. Those perks are basically meaningless if you're not paying off that balance in full each month.
Yeah, it's like they're almost not even real perks if
Exactly.
you're paying more for them than you're actually getting back.
It's like being handed a coupon for a free coffee after you've already spent hundreds of dollars on this extravagant dinner you couldn't really afford.
Ooh, that's a good analogy.
Right. It makes those perks seem a lot less appealing.
Way less appealing. And what about those credit cards that boast about insurance perks?
Oh, yeah. You always have to read the fine print on those.
Okay.
Because often, dedicated insurance policies, they just offer far more comprehensive coverage than what you'd get as a credit card add-on.
Really? Okay, so it's kind of like...
Yeah, they might sound nice as, a bonus.
Right.
But if you're relying on them as your primary insurance,
Yeah.
you could be in for a rude awakening.
Not good.
If something goes wrong, not good.
For a while there, I actually convinced myself that those, deferred interest offers... those were a good deal.
Oh, man. Those are so sneaky.
Right.
That whole no interest for 12 months thing, it sounds amazing.
It does.
But if you don't pay off that entire balance before that introductory period is up, they often hit you with all that accumulated interest retroactively. It's brutal.
It's like a ticking time bomb for your finances.
It really is.
And that brings us to perhaps the biggest myth of all. It's fine if I don't pay my credit card balance in full right away.
Oh, if only that were true.
Right.
That kind of thinking is how people end up, digging themselves into a deep, deep hole.
Yeah, because it's not like that debt just magically disappears.
No. Credit card debt, it sticks with you. It impacts your credit score, which can affect your ability to get loans down the line.
Oh, wow.
Even at, like, rent an apartment, buy a car.
Seriously.
Yeah, it can have some serious consequences.
Yikes. So it sounds like, I don't know, the key takeaway here is that credit cards themselves aren't like inherently bad or evil.
No, not at all.
All about how we use them, right?
Exactly. Knowledge is power when it comes to credit cards.
Okay, I like
It's
that.
about understanding, the psychology behind how they're designed and using that knowledge to make, smarter choices.
Okay, so speaking of smarter choices, I love that the video didn't just leave us with a bunch of scary warnings about credit card debt.
Right.
They actually flipped the script and
Yeah.
talked about how we can kind of be the players in this credit card game.
Yes.
Not the pawns.
Yes.
Exactly.
I love that.
Take control.
So how do we do that?
Well, one way is to think about who's actually profiting from this whole system, right?
Okay.
Have you ever considered, like, investing in companies like Visa, MasterCard, American Express?
Huh. It's like instead of letting them profit off of my, my spending habits, I could potentially benefit from their success in a more, in a more mindful way. Exactly. Plus, those companies are often considered relatively stable investments, and they tend to offer decent dividends.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But always remember, this is just, food for thought. Do your research, talk to a financial advisor before making any big decisions.
Always good advice.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's wrap things up with some concrete advice, something actionable that people can take away from this. The video shared, like, 3 golden rules for healthy credit card use.
Okay, love it.
I think they're worth repeating. Rule number 1, and I think this should be everyone's, like, default setting.
Okay.
Debit first, credit almost never.
Yes, love that. If you can treat your credit card as a last resort rather than your go-to, you're already ahead of the game.
I love that. Rule number 2, if you absolutely have to borrow money, like for a car or a home improvement project, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Explore things like a personal loan before you even think about racking up credit card debt.
Yes. Because it's all about understanding those interest rates. Personal loans usually come with lower fixed rates, which are way easier to budget for, way easier to pay off, compared to those sneaky credit card rates that can fluctuate.
Totally. And finally, rule number 3. This one I thought was so clever. It's the dedicated spending account hack.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Right.
It's just simple but effective strategy.
It really is. Okay, so instead of linking your debit card directly to your main checking account,
Right.
set up a separate checking account specifically for spending.
Okay.
Put in like a set amount each month, for groceries, eating out, entertainment, whatever your personal spending categories are.
That way you're not as tempted to, like, dip into your savings or overspend.
Exactly. You have those clear boundaries right there.
Exactly.
It's like giving yourself a built-in budgeting system that's just like tied to your everyday spending. So much better than relying on willpower alone.
Oh, 100%. Couldn't agree more. And, on that note of empowering ourselves to make, like, smarter choices about money, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah, this has been great.
Right.
A really fascinating conversation.
It has been.
Hopefully everyone listening feels, a little bit more informed and a lot less intimidated by those credit cards.
Yes, exactly. And to our listeners, we'll leave you with this thought-provoking question. With things like contactless payments and digital currencies becoming more and more common, how do you think our relationship with money will continue to evolve?
Now that's something to think about.
Right. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the psychology of credit cards. We'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.